All right, so let's talk about bones and homeostasis, so how they help maintain some of these different ion balances in our body. Okay. So again, one of the things that our bones are constantly undergoing remodeling, right? Constantly. So old tissue is always being replaced by new tissue, even if there's nothing wrong with you. So like just on a day-to-day basis, just due to strain and stuff like that, your osteoblasts are building new bone and osteoclasts are breaking it down. So you have this constant turnover of bone in your body. Okay. So basically, here's a nice little fun fact for you. So the distal end of your femur, so the distal end of your femur would be by your knee, right? It's fully remodeled every 4 months. So that's about how much bone remodeling is going on in you. Okay. And I found this image. So really to drive this idea home of how much your bones remodel based on stress. Okay. Depending on the stresses you put on your bones, they will respond to it. So again, very similar to like the calluses, like your skin, how it responds to calluses, and if you keep irritating an area, your bones will also respond to the stresses you put on it. So in this case, they look at tennis players, right? So if you look at tennis players, right, they're usually one arm dominant when they're playing. So that arm is going to undergo a lot more stress, you know, as they're hitting the ball than the other arm. And when they looked, they did bone density measurements. In fact, if you look at this image here, you can see that the right arm, where it's kind of lighting up in these different colors, those areas are going to be more dense in comparison to the person's left arm. So their bones have responded to that constant, you know, force that they put on it. Very similarly, you've probably have all heard like the bow-legged cowboy. Well, individuals, and that's not necessarily an exaggeration, individuals who would have spent hours and hours and hours every day on a horse for a long period of time, that's a very significant and very unique stress, and their bodies would have actually responded to that so that their legs actually would have bowed, you know, kind of around the shape of the horse. So for an example. This principle, however, is going to be one of those reasons why, particularly, they tell women to do weight-bearing exercises. So go for walks, lift weights, anything like that. Because the more weight that you put on your bones, the more they're going to respond to that stress, the thicker they will get. Within limits, yes, you can break your bones. Yes, you can cause stress factors. So without going overboard, but you can help build up that bone density. Now, this is particularly important to women because I think, as we are well aware, once women hit menopause, they no longer have it. They start losing some of the bone density, right? So the more bone you have, the denser it is to begin with, the less you are affected by osteoporosis. Okay? So that's why I would highly recommend to all of you, and it's not like guys can't get osteoporosis either. So I'd highly recommend to you, try to get that bone density up now, so that later on in life, you're just that much healthier. All right. So let me hide me so you can get a better view of these things. Since most of you are going into some sort of allied health field, I just want to go over some common names for fractures with you. You're going to see these terms come up all the time. So basically, fractures can get their names either for their shape or their position, you know, basically where they're located. So in this case, so in this image right here, you have what's known as a green stick fracture. So kind of like if you were to take a branch off a tree that's, you know, still living, and that you try to break it in half, you know how it doesn't quite break all the way through. There's a little bit of it that's still kind of hanging on. That's what a green stick fracture is like. So the arrow's kind of hiding this, but so here's the ulna, the bone in your forearm by your pinky, and basically you can kind of see this did not break through, this broke through, right? So that's a green stick fracture. It's partial, didn't go all the way through. An impacted fracture, basically one side of the fracture is driven into the interior of the other. So basically here you can see the humerus. It's slightly different than this image, but in this x-ray you can see it broke right at the neck, and basically the shaft got shoved into the head of the humerus, which I've not witnessed in person. However, it seems horribly painful. A closed fracture basically means the skin was not broken. An open fracture means the bone is sticking out, which is also horrifying to think about. So it's, so you can have different kind of combinations of these terms. A comminuted fracture is basically, if you ever hear of a bone being shattered, and this is not necessarily the world's best X-ray of this, but basically the broken ends. They're not just a simple break, rather you actually have little shards of bone. So a lot of times this is when they have to go in and put plates and kind of screw bones back together again. These two are fairly common terms that you're going to run into. So a distal fibular fracture, so down by your ankle, so you can kind of see the action that would have caused it, like kind of roll your ankle inward. That can cause the fibula to break, the lateral bone. That's called a Pott's fracture. And then a break of the distal part of the radius is called a Colles fracture. And then you may have heard of stress fractures. A lot of times, well, let's just kind of go with this definition. So simply a stress fracture, these are tiny little fissures. So they're not like big fractures like this, but they're tiny like little cracks, if you will, that result in bones from repeated like chronic stress. So if you do like a lot of running, like long distance runners will sometimes have stress fractures in their lower shins, right, or in a tibia, lower part of their leg. What we usually term shin splints, a lot of times it's not necessarily a bone issue, it's more inflammation in the muscles of the lower leg, but it feels like a broken bone. So shin splints is sort of like an umbrella term for anything that really is lower leg pain. But a stress fracture is simply due to bones. Okay. So how do we repair a fracture? All right, so remember, we got lots of blood in these bones. So what ends up happening, and obviously this can get more or less complicated, but in this case, this periosteum was not damaged, right? So what you're going to have here, so you've broken blood vessels, so you're going to have basically a clot forming. And so a clot will form. White blood cells will get in there. They're going to make sure that nothing, that any kind of microbe or anything like that shouldn't be there is not there. And then other types of phagocytic cells are there to try to clean up anything that shouldn't be there. And then what ends up happening is those fibroblasts are going to build a little callus. So you get like a little bump of cartilage. So here you have a chondroblast. You see that term right here where my arrow is? So chondroblast, so basically those are building cartilage. So you sort of try that hyaline cartilage model all over again, just like that endochondral ossification. So the little cartilage bump, and you can kind of see fill in the spaces with cartilage. It's sort of a temporary fix. And then the osteoblasts come in and they basically turn that cartilage back into bone. So again, sort of similar to what we saw with endochondral ossification. And that bony callus can remain 3 to 4 months after the actual bone is healed. Sometimes it lasts a lifetime on some people. Sometimes when they fracture a bone, they'll have a bump of bone there for the rest of their lives. It doesn't go away. But in theory, the osteoclasts should come in, and based on the stresses that you're putting on your bone, they should kind of take that bump and wear it down back to the original shape of that the bone once had. So you may have heard anecdotally that basically broken bones, they heal stronger. Well, technically they can. I mean, this bony callus, right where you broke the bone, is actually thicker than the surrounding bone that wasn't broken. So technically, right at that break, your bone actually is a little bit thicker for a while, until those osteoclasts again kind of remodel it back to where it was. Here are just some images of bones that did not get remodeled correctly. So here's an individual, and I couldn't tell you like the age of the individual or anything like that. But basically, here you're looking at a tibia. So here's the distal end of it, and you can kind of see here the bone broke. It never got set properly. So when it healed itself misaligned. You can imagine this person lived in lots of agony, and they probably had a very difficult time walking, if at all they could walk. What you're looking at here, this bone is the ulna, this bone is a radius. Again, you can kind of see where this radius broke right here. This is a classic telltale signs of lots of inflammation that occurred. So bone not only did it not get set properly, so it's not, a nice straight line, but also due to the inflammation, he had all this bony growth kind of in that space in between the bones and even some down here. Something that you should keep in mind with this is bone only knows how to grow bone, right? So if you inflame bone, it's going to try to deal with the inflammation by creating bone. That's what it knows how to do. So that's what you're seeing here. Is there's inflammation, massive inflammation in the bone, so it tried to deal with that inflammation by growing more bone. And so now probably this person had a really hard time. They probably couldn't move, like how you do palm up, palm down. They probably couldn't do that. It's probably fused in one position. And then here's just another image. Here you can see a femur. So let's see, that's the left one. This is the right one. As you can see, the person broke their femur, did not set properly. Again, it did heal, right? So the break healed, but healed incorrectly because it wasn't set. So this is why setting bones correctly is so important. So you can see the one leg was longer than the other. Again, probably had lots of problems walking. If they could walk at all, probably lived in a lot of pain. All right? Let me know if you have any questions on any of that or anything that we talked about earlier. Feel free to email me. Got a bit of time on this video, so I'm just going to keep going. Let's talk about calcium homeostasis. So again, calcium is going to be super important in our bodies. So proper nerve functioning, we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks. Muscle cells, basically all along the way, we're going to see how important calcium is. When in your blood clots, and you'll talk about this in 202, it is a multi-step clotting cascade. So you probably have some, and I don't know the exact number, but you probably have at least 10 steps to this. And along every single step, you have to have calcium. Okay, so very important in the blood clotting cascade. And then it also functions to help many enzymes in different reactions. So calcium is super important in our bodies. So how we maintain proper calcium levels in the bloodstream is basically this feedback loop that you're seeing in this image, right? So let's just kind of take a look at it. So for some reason, your blood calcium levels drop, whatever that reason may be. So that's what this is saying. For some reason, our blood calcium levels are too low. So again, this will inhibit proper muscle firing, proper nerve firing, right? So in your parathyroid gland, and so right around your throat, right around where the Adam's apple is, you have a thyroid gland, and on the back of that is going to be these parathyroid glands. So that parathyroid gland is going to detect those low levels of calcium in the blood. Okay? So basically what happens is that parathyroid gland produces something called parathyroid hormone. That's fairly easy enough to remember, right? Parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone. That parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate osteoclasts to break down bone, because as soon as you break down bone, you're releasing calcium from the bone, right? It'll also stimulate the kidneys, not only to retain calcium in the blood, so don't lose it in the urine, but also it'll help produce, it'll stimulate the production of calcitriol. And again, if you remember back, calcitriol is going to be that active form of vitamin D, which will help calcium absorption from your diet. Okay? So all those things are going to work together to help increase your blood calcium levels. And you have different receptors that will sense this, and then hopefully that brings calcium levels back to what normal should be. Okay? Now, if your blood levels get too high, your thyroid gland now, so not your parathyroid, but your thyroid gland will secrete something called calcitonin. All right? So what calcitonin does is it stops the osteoclasts, so do not break bone down, right? We don't want to break bone down because we have plenty of calcium in the bloodstream. Instead, what we want to do is we want to take that calcium in the bloodstream and let's put it into bone. So the things that are going to put calcium into bones are osteoblasts. So calcitonin will stimulate osteoblasts and inhibit osteoclasts. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense to you as well. Please let me know if that didn't. Okay. So as I had mentioned to you before, within reason, right? Exercise is going to help you build stronger bones. Now, as I mentioned, like long distance runners or sometimes athletes, sometimes they train so hard that they actually cause lots of those stress fractures, and then they do something that's a fairly minor activity like jumping or fast pivot on like a basketball court, and the bone just snaps. So obviously you can take it to the point of detriment, but within reason, weight-bearing exercise will help you build up your bones. So things, again, you get to look forward to. As you get older, estrogen, particularly in women, but this also affects men, estrogen levels will decrease, and basically what that ends up happening is that estrogen helps inhibit osteoclasts, and without estrogen being there to help inhibit osteoclasts, they kind of ramp up their activity. So basically they start wearing away at the bone faster than you build bone. Okay? So eventually, basically, bone becomes demineralized. Also, like everything else in the body, you're just not producing things as quickly as you once were. So you're decreasing your collagen production, which means that bones become brittle and more likely to fracture if you hit them or if you fall or something like that. Okay. So here, this is the L2 vertebra, so your second lumbar vertebra. On the left here, it's in a 37-year-old male. On the right, it's in a 75-year-old female. This is the body of the vertebra. So you can kind of see just the difference in density. So this female had severe osteoporosis. It can be just that delicate. I've worked with enough cadavers where in some of the elderly females, and you just touch like a rib and it snaps like a little twig. So it's fairly profound. This individual that you see here suffers from a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. So let's see if I can write this here. Oops. Osteogenesis imperfecta. Okay. And I think it's pretty obvious when you take a look at, the bones, just how bad that is. I mean, that's not rickets, that's osteogenesis imperfecta. And what that is basically this individual is unable to produce collagen in their bones. Okay, so they can't produce that collagen. So basically their bones are so brittle that they're constantly like breaking and reforming under the weight of their own body. And so basically they can't form properly. They get all bent and warped like that because they're just so brittle. I know, kind of crazy, right? Like, I mean, think of how rickets, those bones were delicate because they didn't have enough calcium, right? And they kind of bowed and stuff. In this case, it's because they just can't put collagen in there, and so they're constantly breaking. It's called like glass bone syndrome sometimes. There was that one movie with the one guy, it was like Unbreakable or something like that. The one guy that I think Samuel L. Jackson played, right? And anyway, so sometimes you'll hear about these individuals, like this happens from birth. So sometimes parents will be accused of child abuse because, like, they're bringing their kids into the hospital and there's always broken bones and stuff like that. And all they did was try to burp the kid after feeding or something like that. It's because their bones are just so brittle, they just break all the time. I know, kind of crazy, right? All right. So that's it for the bones and bone formation. Like with any of these videos, if you have any questions for me, please let me know. Feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. All right? So see you next time.